Hello, everyone. My name is Annalise Harris. I'm the Communications Director for Great Education Colorado, and I'm very fortunate and grateful for the opportunity to have a conversation with Professor Felicia Brown, who is volunteering and sharing some of her time and expertise regarding the conversations about critical race theory. A lot of folks are interested in this conversation, may not have resources, and are interested in how they can support and push accuracy and this very clear attack on equity, diversity, and inclusion that has been clumped into what we are calling and understanding CRT, critical race theory. Great Education is committed to equity, inclusion, diversity, and it definitely wants to be a space to provide those resources so you can be educated on this topic, as well as share the information with your colleagues, peers, family, and students and children. Without further ado, Professor Felicia Brown, thank you again for joining virtually. I definitely want to give you the floor, and if you want to share a little bit of your background, that's great, and your teaching, that'd be great. And then we'll jump into this conversation on critical race theory.
I teach sociology, women and gender studies, deviance, and I've been teaching at a collegiate level for about 5 years now, mostly in community colleges, but I've also taught in specialized art schools. So I've taught different demographics, and being able to include diverse people that may not have experience in higher ed or have family members that are is part of why I became a teacher.
Wow, thank you so much. And you came out to Colorado fairly recently, right? So
About 3 years, I guess it is now.
yeah, definitely. So you definitely had enough time to, explore and also get connected to the community. I definitely would love your functional definition. How do you describe and define critical race theory as a sociologist, educator, and expert in the field?
So for intro level students, like first time around, haven't had any of this prior discussion, I use critical race theory and define it as a theoretical perspective or lens that we as social scientists and sociologists in particular use to understand the role race plays at an institutional level. And another thing that's useful to define is what an institution is. So an institution are things like government, education, economy, family, and religion. All of those things, medical communities, media, those are what institutions are.
So is education would be considered an institution, right? And so it's a hot battleground. Parents are fighting left and right, to protect their children from scary critical race theory. Do you have any thoughts on or observations surrounding this conversation about critical race theory and pertaining specifically to education?
Well, you're absolutely right. Education as an institution is what molds our culture, what molds our values. So it's always going to be one of the first places that any person that wants power is going to get into. I mean, what's the first thing a place at war goes and does when they take over? They burn the libraries. Right. They get rid of a lot of the history and they change the language, etc. So I think this is what's actually going on when we talk about critical race theory. It's become heavily politicized in a way that moves from patriotism and American values to blind nationalism. And when I say blind nationalism, I'm talking about what we call in sociology ethnocentrism, where we value American values and what the dominant values of a culture are over everyone else's globally, et cetera, which disproportionately affects brown people, Black people, immigrants, et cetera, or anything that is not considered the norm. And there are several concerns within that. And one of those is getting hung up on what the term theory means, also the term racism, and what my kids are going to think whenever that gets taught. So, as far as where I start, the first misconception is what theory is. So, whenever we talk about theory, we often think of it's not solid, right? Well, I want you to think about gravity for a second. The theory of relativity is gravity, and it's very real in its consequences, even though we can't see it with our naked eye. It We do say that the wind affects it, that the temperature outside affects it, etc. But just because those things affect how something falls doesn't mean that we say that the gravitational pull is not real. And that's the challenge that we're facing in critical race theory as a social science, is that the validity is constantly pulled into the picture and questioned just because it's a social science. But it works in much the same way, and that's why we call it a lens or a perspective. You wouldn't expect to try and look at a cell and see why it mutates and causes illness without a microscope. So critical race theory isn't any different. You still need that lens to examine why at a societal level things aren't working in the way that we value and with the things that we value as Americans, like diversity, equality, freedom, the right to choose. Even competition and capitalism require that you have some sort of equal playing field. And I've been taught, I don't know about you guys, but I've been taught all my life that these are the things that America is based upon. We're a melting pot full of new ideas from other places. So to silence this and to not talk about race critically and how at an institutional level that's affecting people's navigation of the world is to put our next generation at a heavy disenfranchised way. Like we're preventing them from learning and making the world a better place. And not only that, but we're saying that they don't have the capacity to understand it in a way that they can make change. And particularly when we talk about Black and Brown students, immigrant students, et cetera, regardless of whether you speak about it or not, they're going to experience it. And they're going to make up in their own heads what's going on. So having a name to it and having a way to look at things critically allows us to grant autonomy to those that experience it. It allows us to validate that experience, and it also allows us to, for our white students, to have them acknowledge and recognize that it happens, because oftentimes we don't realize things that happen if they're not happening to us or if it's not happening to someone very close to us. I don't know about you guys, but I've had experiences where um, I haven't thought about being disabled at all, but then when I had to help my grandma go to a graduation ceremony or go into a restaurant or not have a handicap stall available, those barriers become extremely apparent then. But there's no way to like teach that or show that without having the framework, without having the lens to discuss it in.
Wow, that is so powerful. Some of the major takeaways that, are definitely going to be quotes to use. Even your comparison of gravity. I mean, that definitely, I think, can be a really great parallel. You may not see it, you've heard it exists, and you should understand what impacts it possibly, but you really can't negate its existence.
It's the consequences.
And
It's very real in its consequences, and it's
exactly,
measured as such.
you're gonna fall if if this happens, right? And it might hurt too. And then another takeaway, just that it's critical race theory is the lens, and you even compared it to cell dividing or cells creating diseases, or splitting. You can't really see that unless you have a microscope and you have the right lens, right? And so obviously, if we are to become a better nation and improve from our past faults and what it's how we started, and uplift everyone, and what everyone's claim is to be unified and be great America, right? You need to actually have a certain lens there as well, and be able to critique it in the future, and to improve our future, right? And then the last thing is also at looking at it at the societal level, right? We really need to see, how is, as you said, the definition, the role race plays in an impacting an institution is at the societal level in education. We can, in general. Then the last piece that I definitely just thought was really powerful as well was when you were referring to, regardless of if we talk about critical race theory or not, Black, Brown, other marginalized communities and children in particular, we're talking about our education system, so our kids, they may be experiencing instances of racism or discrimination and different other forms of oppression. So it's happening, and so we should be really able to equip everyone who is a part of this system, whether you've enacted it, witnessed it, or creating policies, or it's imposed on you. So the other piece was just also acknowledging white students possibly not understanding the impact, and it's okay to talk about it. Just like which you gave the example, I really appreciated that, about our elders who might benefit from handicap signs, stickers, universal design, where wheelchairs and are accessible in all the buildings. The bathrooms stalls are big enough to help them get in and out, and even stairs and things like that. We don't think that way if it's not our lens immediately, right? And so critical race theory is an opportunity to have that lens and understand the perspective of another group that maybe we really don't. And in particular, we're talking about race. So if you don't identify, it's okay. And it's actually beneficial for everyone, not just, protect, looking at my child, it doesn't happen to them. They don't need to learn about it.
I actually likened it to teaching teenagers how to drive. Whenever we teach teenagers how to drive, we know that as a demographic and as actuarial science, we know that they are more likely to get in a wreck. We know that they are also more likely to engage in risky behavior, whether that's due to lack of experience, etc. But we as parents don't go in thinking that everyone is out to hit them on the road. We also don't go in thinking that, okay, my son, daughter, etc., are going to go in and be hyper aggressive drivers. However, that doesn't mean that we don't teach them how to drive or give them the tools to learn how to drive in the first place. It also doesn't mean that we assume the worst of them. Right? We're not going to assume the worst of them. We're giving them the tools to use, and we still teach them defensive driving. We still teach them that it's not good to be an aggressive driver. So no matter which side of the fence that you work on this, you're still learning to work within a community and hopefully make it better.
Yeah. Wow. That's just
while not getting hurt yourself.
Right. And trying to make it home. And there's rules that are enacted, things happen. And that's something also that has come out of these conversations where, for one, people are clumping critical race theory with the push to be diverse and be cognizant of your impact or your choices in hiring or the curriculum you're using, and clumping it as a whole negative for critical race theory. For one, that's the issue. And then two, an attack on diversity and inclusion as though that was bad. Like there's some organizations that are providing lists of words that are connected, they're claiming are connected to critical race theory and are code words. I'm not sure if you knew that, but the words are in particular, I'm going to pull them up here. I was just in shock. I don't really want to give this organization much more, emphasis. So I'm just going to say they tout education, not indoctrination.
Well,
But
that's where the idea of critical comes in. It's not my job to teach my students how to or what to think in particular about an object. It's my job to be like, here's this side, here's the other side, here's what's happened historically in the past that doesn't brush over Black and Brown experience, because we need to pay attention to what's missing. That's part of critical thinking. And once they have all the information, the choice is theirs what they do with that information.
So I'm going to share this screen here, and it is just the list of words. It says critical race theory, CRT code words. Okay. And you'll just see how outrageous it is, because the definitions, you're just like, is this bad? So critical race theory code words: abolitionist, abolitionist
Okay.
teaching, anti-bias, anti-blackness, anti-racism, BIPOC, colorism, critical ethnic studies. I'll scroll down a little more: cultural appropriate, cultural competence, responsiveness, discrimination, diversity, educational justice, just identity safe, inclusion. I mean, these terms would you associate them specifically with critical race theory?
I would associate a lot of them with any theory or any social science study.
Yeah, yeah, not just critical race theory. So it just is very interesting that they're clumping words that describe experiences, describe movements that, have brought equity, or are able to explain efforts that people are taking to provide safe spaces for children to learn. Let me see. Let's see. Land acknowledgement, multiculturalism, no place
And
for
these
hate.
are not at all how we define things. And this is yet another point. This brings up another important point. We have been teaching critical race theory since 1930s officially with Du Bois. So this has been around a very long time. It's only recently that it's become politicized to this degree. And it has a lot to do with what we call in sociology the hidden curriculum, where you identify not just what is being taught, but what is not being taught. And it's that erasure that often leads to huge gaps in knowledge and controls who has access to that knowledge.
Mhm,
So that's, I guess, my question to the public is, why wouldn't you want your child to have access to all the information to
mhm.
make a choice?
Yeah.
Because you think that your child is going to make the right choice, right? So how is it really choice if we're not putting everything on the table?
And then even if it's not even everything, this is what is baffling. I'm like, this is just a
The
small portion.
slice,
Yeah.
slice.
Sociology is a
Like this is one big chapter in my entire intro to sociology class.
yes,
Just one tiny chapter,
one chapter. And so
but it permeates everything. And
see,
that's my job to teach you at the institutional level.
exactly. And so when it comes to, the difference between you work with college students. So obviously the conversations are going to be more adult, more advanced intellectually, possibly. What would you say about the critique lately is, I don't want my 6-year-old learning about these things. So what would you say as a college professor? You
My
already said it's only a
6-year-old.
slice, but to the parent of a 6-year-old who is struggling to figure out, hey, is CRT good or is this too much for them? I don't think they should learn about this. It's divisive. What would your advice be for that parent or school
Advice for
district?
or questions?
Whichever, right? And I think, what? I think you're even highlighting the work of a sociologist is to question, right? And it's not to just
Yes.
give answers. It is to provide information and pull the engagement from the students you're working with, right? For them to critique, which you said already, right? So for sure, if you have questions, let's hear them. Yeah. What would you ask of those parents or suggest those parents do or explore?
Well, first of all, it would depend on whether I was talking to a Black or brown parent or a white parent. So if this were a white parent, I would be asking them, I would ask them first of all, when did they first learn about Thanksgiving?
Mm-hmm.
And did they learn about Indian culture and what happened there? Well, maybe that's too early. Okay, maybe that's too early. well, when is it too early for a Black or brown person to be shot?
Mm,
If it's early enough for them to be shot, then that's probably the time that we need to actually start,
mhm,
probably past the time that we need to start.
mhm,
And that would be my main question to them,
mhm,
to be like, we want you and your children to actually be safe. And the first place to start is to talk about history and let them know that we're doing better and we're working to do better and we need their help.
And when you say shot, would you mind explaining by whom, what entity?
By police in
Okay.
particular,
Okay.
because in the Black and brown community, that's another thing. It's not even something we need to explain.
Mhm,
But you pointed out just again right there where we have to explain that
mhm,
to people that may not experience that in their communities or may live in a town like my hometown, which is two stoplights and is still named after Nathan Bedford Forrest, the starter of the Ku Klux Klan. The first time I heard the term wetback, I was around 7.
mhm,
And I had been raised by my white family. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew is that the tone was very negative. So if it's early enough for them to experience it, why is it not early enough to educate them about it and give them some defense, not just defense, but some ideas on how to A, not perpetuate it, and B, not not incur as much harm in a defensive way. Like
mhm.
I have so many questions, and that's just where I would start.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate your time and definitely the definitions that you provided, the examples and parallels that you highlighted. And I am looking forward to staying in touch with you. And if we need to do a follow up based on,
Question.
whatever questions folks do have, and maybe they want to talk with you, would we be able to provide your Community College of Denver contact or
Yeah,
information?
sure.
Okay, cool. Well, again, thank you for your time and expertise. And on behalf of Great Education Colorado, we definitely appreciate this opportunity to expand on critical race theory and educate our followers and those who are trying to learn and understand what this craze and hoopla, I guess is a good word, is about critical race theory and the clumping they are doing with efforts to attack and eradicate diversity inclusion efforts, which uplift our entire nation and benefit everyone. So thanks again. And do you have any last words before we go?
The last words that I do kind of want to address because we spent a little more time talking about white people, because usually they're the ones that need the most reminder that these things exist, is to also know that just because we have all these negative statistics and demographic studies on Black and Brown Americans does not mean that change isn't capable. This is still something that we have to work together to do. And the idea that it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy and the sense that it's going to be is what ends up creating the self-fulfilling prophecy. So let's arm them and give them the knowledge that they need to create a better America.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And well, we'll keep on pushing. And if you have any other resources, to definitely email them to me, and I'll make sure to share them with our followers. Thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you.